There's no debate that ranged combat is fun. But what better way to humiliate your enemy than to cut them down using one of the Federation's fine melee weapons?
And now with the release of the Python Commando's Premium War Bond, we have an all-new weapon for close quarters combat, the CQC-9 Defoliation tool.
Or, as most divers like to call it, the chainsaw. But why such a weapon? And where did chainsaws even come from in the first place? Let's find out.
Right, so as long as humanity's been around, we've been trying to find out the answer to one burning question in particular. How do I cut through this as fast and violently as possible?
So this isn't exactly a chainsaw, more of a hedge trimmer. But while it may not fare so well against bots and bugs, my rose bushes are absolutely meticulously kept.
You'll have to show us some clips sometime, Spizzo. Anyway, the defoliation tool does more than just neaten up some begonias and whack a few weeds. It's a weapon that starts off pretty mild, then ramps up the damage in a matter of seconds. But never mind the Federation, when was the first chainsaw even invented?
Well, according to our sources on the GWW, the origins of the chainsaw can be traced all the way back to the mid-1780s. A flexible saw was pioneered by two Scottish doctors, John Aitken and James Jeffrey. But to be more precise, the earliest prototype of a chainsaw as we know it today exists in the form of the osteotome, a handheld surgical instrument developed by German orthopedist and precision mechanic Bernard Heine in 1830.
But the earliest patent for a chainsawing machine made up of chain links with teeth was granted to Frederick Elmer Gore of New York in 1883. It was over 20 years later in 1905 that Samuel J. Benz of San Francisco developed a chainsaw with a guide frame for the purposes of cutting down gigantic redwoods.
And centuries later, here we are, with what might be the ultimate version of the chainsaw, the CQC-9 Defoliation tool. And you can bet you'll be felling more than just trees with this bad boy.
Now on to the really mandatory part of this briefing, the safety guide. And yes, the Ministry of Defense demanded we include this, so pay close attention if you want to keep all your limbs and digits attached to your body, troops.
In order to release your inner Leatherface, let's review all the parts of the CQC-9. First, we've got the guide bar, which allows for your cutting chain to move around in a rapid linear motion. This is the part you don't want to touch, even when the defoliation tool isn't operational. Now, of course, with this much power, you'll need to grip the defoliation tool with both hands, one on the rear handguard and the other on the front handguard or chain brake.
You can control the speed of the cutting chain by squeezing and gently releasing the throttle or trigger near the rear handguard. When operating it, we recommend you start off a little slower to let the teeth sink in, then doubling down on the throttle once the teeth bite into your target. Of course, you'll still be able to move while operating the CQC-9, but if you want to maintain control over it, you'll need to slow down to a walk. You know it's bad to run with scissors, so running with a chainsaw is similarly dangerous.
And although this should be obvious, please exercise extreme caution when sawing into anything that can burst, explode, or otherwise burn you. We'll get into some specifics in a bit, but this one's a no-brainer. Also bear in mind that the defoliation tool weighs more than your standard melee weapon, so your attacks will generally be slow. If you don't keep this in mind, it could be you getting cut to ribbons instead of your target.
Alright, troops, now let's go over a few observations. Vanguard, along with 3 SES admirals, Ranger Warhorse, Coffeyton, and Chris, commander of the ADU, tested out the CQC-9 defoliation tool in the field against all 3 factions, and ran missions against the bugs, bots, and squids twice to put the CQC-9 through its paces.
Each mission was run on Super Helldive, difficulty 10, to allow squad dynamics to come into play. Note that the CQC-9 was not used by all participants, and even when it was used, it was only used for a short period of time until a given Helldiver was killed by an enemy.
Remember, the defoliation tool is a close quarters weapon that should only be used under certain conditions and when the opportunity permits. If you want to survive on higher difficulty missions, you will need to use it alongside other stratagems and ranged weapons so that you aren't completely overwhelmed. Also bear in mind that, like the CQC-1 One True Flag, the CQC-9 Defoliation tool is a support weapon, so while you can use it with a jump, warp or hover pack, or any backpack for that matter, using it with the M1000 Maxi Gun or another support weapon requiring a backpack is simply not an option.
And keep in mind that for every mission, Vanguard used the RS-40 Beast of Prey heavy armor that comes with the rock-solid passive. This allows the wearer to resist being ragdolled and also provides a 100% bonus to melee damage, so in this case, the chainsaw's damage was effectively doubled. Now, with all the disclaimers and notes out the way, let's take a look at how the CQC-9 shaped up against each faction. So based on the evidence gathered during field testing, the overall verdict seems to be that the CQC-9 is best against the bugs. Of course, this does come with a couple of exceptions and things you need to keep in mind when using it in the field.
The defoliation tool starts off with medium penetration, but as you hold and rev it up while digging into an enemy, the damage ramps up to heavy penetration. That means if you're lucky and crazy enough, you can kill almost anything with the CQC-9, at least in theory.
The defoliation tool is a lot of fun against the bugs, but with a slow attack speed, it's actually not all that great against scavengers. In fact, it feels really clunky against them. It certainly gets a lot more interesting as soon as you get to warriors, hunters, and even half-guards. If you can successfully avoid their attacks, the CQC-9 basically one-shots most enemies, and if you place your saw on the right body parts, consider the job done.
The defoliation tool makes short work of Alpha Commanders, Hive Guards, and Bile and Nursing Spewers. You will want to aim for their heads, and in the case of anything that can, pop, you'll want to avoid hitting these parts, unless you like being slowed down or turned into mush in an instant. Vanguard was even able to get close enough to an impaler and take it out using the CQC-9 after it put its head in the ground to attack with its tentacles. In other words, in the right places, this thing is really formidable.
Then, of course, there are some of the drawbacks. For flying enemies like Shriekers and Dragon Roaches, the defoliation tool is basically a no-go, unless you can perfectly time your swipes for Shriekers. I did attempt to cut a Baltardan's leg, but was sadly unsuccessful. Maybe I just need to try again, but my strategy of jumping around trying not to get stomped on failed miserably. If you can avoid a charger and hit it in its rear end with the CQC-9, you can easily take it out. Naturally, you'll need to make sure you can actually avoid it bearing down on you.
In short, the defoliation tool is overall great against the bugs, but if you find yourself enveloped by a swarm, you may want to retreat. Stims may help, but sometimes the best option is to simply run away so you can fight another day.
Moving on to the clankers, you're probably thinking the CQC-9 is a bad option overall. But while our admirals had mixed opinions on its efficacy, I can say that it's extremely good under the right circumstances.
The bots have a lot of heavily armored units and a ton of firepower at their disposal, which makes the defoliation tool less than ideal in most scenarios. However, in my opinion, it absolutely obliterates rocket and standard devastators, even shield devastators if you can flank them.
Vanguard actually found a whole horde of rocket devastators and cut them down in no time.
0 ammo used, little to no damage taken, and every devastator decommissioned in no time.
You're not going to want to run into a head-on fight with the bots using the CQC-9, but if you're able to close the gap using terrain or simply staying quiet, you can annihilate most units in seconds. Warhorse and Vanguard had very good results using the defoliation tool on a Warstrider's legs, and in another instance, Vanguard snuck up behind a Hulk, tearing into its rear vents and rendering it useless in no time at all.
That reminds me, the defoliation tool actually stuns or staggers enemies, making them unable to fight back or react for a short period of time. This is really useful and allows you to finish off tough targets with ease, but only if you land your hit and know how to handle the chainsaw. Oh, and get this, you can saw into bot fabricators, at least the standard ones, and destroy them that way. So if you're out of grenades or other explosives, this is a pretty reliable method to get the job done.
But remember, dropships and gunships are a no-go, and if you're gonna take on factory striders, make sure no other enemies are near. Pick a foot and get to sawing. Vanguard and his plucky squad were unsuccessful in their attempt, but maybe you can do better. If you can kill a factory strider with the defoliation tool, post it in Helldivers Cinema on our Discord, and maybe we'll feature it in the next Liberty.
In conclusion, my fellow divers didn't really like the CQC-9 against the bots because of their ranged attacks, but I think I had the most fun fighting them while using it. It's just my thoughts. Take my advice, and you may just become a supremely efficient melee killing machine.
And last but not least, we zoom in on the squids. And judging by the file footage, the defoliation tool is probably least effective against the squids. But that doesn't make it useless or something you shouldn't use.
So, from an analysis, using the CQC-9 on voteless works, but if you're not careful where you're swinging, you'll just cut off their legs and have a bunch of crawlers to deal with. So, in that sense, it's not a great solution. And if you can avoid a flesh mob's charge or sneak up on it, then like Hulks and other heavier enemies, you can take it down pretty easily.
And due to the Illuminate having a bunch of flying enemies, the defoliation tool really isn't a great choice. But where it really shines is against Crescent and Standard Overseers. Its ability to stun these medium-armored squids makes it really easy to take them out. But beyond that, well, the utility of the CQC-9 really dries up.
It can take out a harvester, but good luck surviving any arc attacks. In most cases, you're as good as dead. Simply put, the CQC-9 isn't useless against the squids, but for the limited amount of special utility it has, it's mostly not worth taking on missions against the squids. Simple as that.
And thus ends this briefing on the CQC-9 Defoliation tool. So what do you think, Helldivers? Is this chainsaw a good option? Or is it best left gathering dust in your armory? Let us know in the comments.
Like and subscribe, join our Discord, and sign up for a membership today. And don't forget to grab the limited edition Python Commandos merch drop while the offer lasts.
Finally, thank you to Ranger Warhorse, Cofferton, and Chris, Commander of the ADU, for your service. I commend you all, brave admirals. And if you're an admiral, who knows? Maybe you'll get to feature in the next long form. Until next time, troops, stay forever liberated and never ever surrender. For Super Earth and democracy.